All right, well, welcome back to Hebrew Story Hour. Actually, okay, well, this week we are reading, we're kind of in between chapters. Last week we made it in chapter 30 through verse 24. So we're picking up with verse 25. And we're going to move into 31 today, I'm sure of it. But, the Jacob stories especially, it's almost like one long extended story. And so just sort of picking places or where to break off within the story. So in any case, we're pivoting here from the Rachel-Leah rivalry and kind of baby competition children focus to now Laban and Jacob and their rivalry. So chapter 30, verse 25. The Lord bless the reading of his word. Vayehi elav ata yadata et asher avadticha Ve'et asher haya miknecha iti. Oh, I need to stop and start over. My eye skipped to verse 28. All right. Again, starting in verse 25 of chapter 30. Vayehi ka'asher yalada Rachel et Yosef. Vayomer Yaakov el Lavan, Shalecheni ve'elecha el Mekomi ula artsi. Verse 26. Tana et nashai ve'et yaladai, asher avadti otecha behain ve'elecha. Ki ataya data. Et avodati asher avadticha. Verse 27. Vayomer elav Lavan, im na matzati chen be'einecha, nichashti, vayevaracheni Adonai biglalecha. Vayomer nokva sicharcha alai ve'etena. Okay, pausing there at the end of 28 and going back to 25 to translate. When Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away and let me go to my place and to my land. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have worked for you, or I have served you, and let me go. For you yourself know my service, which I served you." And Laban said to him, "If I have only found favor in your eyes, I have divined, and Yahweh has blessed me on because of you." And he said, "Name your price, and I will give it." Verse 29. Vayomer elav ata yadata et asher avadticha ve'et asher haya miknecha iti. 30. Ki ma'at asher haya lecha lefanai vayifrotz larov vayivarech Adonai otecha leragli. V'ata matai e'aseh gam anochi leveiti. Verse 31. Vayomer ma eten lach. Vayomer Yaakov lo teten li me'uma im ta'aseh li hadavar hazeh ashuva er'eh sonecha eshmor. Verse 32. E'evor b'chol tzonecha hayom, haser misham kol se nakod v'talu v'chol se chum ba'kesavim v'talu v'nakom ba'izim v'haya sechari. 33. Va'atana bi tzidkati b'yom machar ki tavo al sechari lefanecha kol asher einenu nakod v'talu ba'izim b'chum ba'kesavim ganuv hu iti. Okay, pausing there at the end of 33 and going back to 29 to translate. And he said to him, you yourself know my service, or how I served you, and how it was, how your flock was with me. For it was, or you had very little before me, and it's broken out into abundance, and Yahweh has blessed you at my feet. And now, when will I work for myself and for my family? And he said, what will I give to you? And Jacob said, you'll not give me anything. If only you would do this thing for me. Let me return and let me shepherd your flock and keep them. And I will cross over among all of your flock today, and removing from there every sheep that is, okay, lots of vocab here, odd vocabulary in this passage, but every sheep that is nakod, speckled, the talu, or spotted, and every sheep that is chum, black, among the lambs, and spotted and speckled among the goats, and it will be my wage. Verse 33 now. And my righteousness will answer on my behalf in a future day. For you will go, or because you will go over my wage before you, or an account of my wage before you. And every spotted and speckled, everything which is not spotted or speckled among the goats, or black among the sheep, it will be stolen with me. In other words, this will be everything that's pure of color he has in itself will be considered ganuv, stolen. Okay, verse 34. Vayomer Lavan hein lu yehi chidvarecha vayasar bayom hahu et hatiyashim ha'akudim v'hatiluim ve'et kol ha'izim ha'nekudot v'hatulot hatiluot, that's what it should be, kol asher lavan bo v'chol chum bak savim vayetain bayad banav. Verse 36. Vayasim derech shaloshet yamim beino uvein Yaakov. Yaakov ro'eh et son Lavan hanotarot. 37. Vayekach lo Yaakov makal livne lach veluz ve'ermon Vayifatzel bahain Pitzalot levanot machsof halavan asher al hamakalot. 38. Vayatseg et hamakalot asher pitzel barohatim bashikatot hamayim asher tavona hatson lishtot lenoach hatson vayechamna bevoan lishtot. We're stopping there. It's kind of in the middle of something. Going back to 34 to translate. And Laban said, look, oh, that it would be as you have spoken. And he removed in that day, that very day, he removed the the goats. Hat is another word for male goats, and the other kinds of goats, ha'akudim, or actually the goats, the spot or the striped and the spotted goats, every kind of goat, ha'izim, the spotted and speckled, everything that was white was to him. So he separated the colored, any kind of colored variation sheep, and kept out from the white ones. And everything that was black among the lambs, and he gave into the hands of his sons. And he put a journey of 3 days between him and between Jacob. Now, Jacob was shepherding the sheep of Laban that was left over. Okay, and then verse 37, and Jacob took for himself makal, sticks of livneh, poplar, fresh poplar. And then we have two other words for trees, a luz, an almond tree, and an ermon, a plane tree. And he peeled on them peelings or switches of white. So he peels them back and reveals the white peelings. And lavan, there's perhaps a word play here, is also is a word for white. So the white pulling back, the switches, and the white peelings, which was up on the sticks. Okay, then we're at 38. And he set the sticks which he peeled in the watering troughs. There's two different words for watering troughs here. Which so that when the sheep or the flock would come to drink water in front of the sheep, and they bred, or they were in heat when they were coming to drink. Okay, now we're in 39. This is one of the more convoluted stories, I think, in the patriarchal narratives. But verse 39, V'yechemu hatson el hamakolot v'teladna hatson akudim nikudim utaluim. Verse 40, V'hakasavim hifrid Yaakov vayitain penei hatson el akod v'chol chum v'tzon lavan vayashit lo adarim livado v'lo shatam al tzon lavan. Verse 41, V'haya b'chol yachem hatzon, hamakusharot v'sam Yaakov et hamaklot le'enei hatzon borohatim v'yachmena b'maklot. 42. Uva ha'atif hatzon lo yasim v'haya ha'atufim l'lavan v'hakshurim le'Yaakov v'yifrotz ha'ish ma'od ma'od v'yihilot son rabot u'shefachot v'avadim u'gamalim hachamorim. Okay, now translating back in 39. And the sheep were in heat, or were giving birth, maybe were in heat before the sticks. And they gave birth, and the flock gave birth to spotted and speckled or actually striped and spotted and speckled sheep. And the lambs, Jacob separated out, and he set the faces of the flock toward to the striped, and every black among the sheep, or every black sheep of Lavan. So he's putting his own sheep toward the faces of Lavan's sheep that had been pulled out. And he set for himself the droves, he separated it out for himself. And he did not set them among or toward the sheep of Lavan. And when all of them had bred, or after all of the breeding of the sheep, the stronger ones, and Jacob set the sticks before the eyes of the sheep and the watering trough when they were giving birth, or when they were in heat, among the stronger ones. Or among the sticks, but he's putting the stronger ones there. And among the weaker ones, or on behalf of the weaker sheep, he did not set them. And it was when the Atufim, there we have like another word for goats of Laban, or no, sorry, the weaker ones went to Laban and the stronger ones went to Jacob. Now the man broke out greatly, or became exceedingly rich, and he had sheep, many sheep, and maidservants, and male servants, and camels, and donkeys. All right, we're going to pause there because we're kind of through the mess, in my mind, that is the story. And you could probably tell by the way I was stumbling through it. I think it's clear enough what's going on in this story, but the actual details are fairly convoluted. It's almost as though, and maybe you all can help me make sense of it, but he's clearly putting something in the water that's making these white sheep, when they're breeding, turn into spotted and speckled and striped sheep. And then there's goats too, sheep and goats. So beyond, maybe we can get into some of those details, but what questions or observations do you have about, we're going to read the next story as well, but about up to the end of chapter 30.
So just kind of a point of interest. I was looking at this earlier. when Laban says, "I've learned by divination,"
Yeah.
the word for divination is nachash, and
Yeah.
the word for serpent is also nachash. It's the only difference was the shin has a patach in divination, and it's is it a katon kametz, the kametz, it looks like a T.
Right. Yeah. The comments.
Yeah, that's
they'd be
the difference. It's just
the
a vowel
noun.
point.
Yeah, the noun for serpent is nachash. And this is a verb, nichash. It's being used in the PL. Yeah, it means it's an interesting line, right? He says,
Verse 27.
yeah, verse 27, because he follows up nichashti, I have divined. Seems like through his divination, he has determined that it's been Yahweh who's blessed him through on account of Jacob. So it's just like a one-off. Yeah, Laban's divining. And divination can mean all sorts of things. It is interesting that, you always have the possibility of kind of the root fallacy of just because a noun and a verb are related in root doesn't mean they have much to do with each other in actual context. However, there may be some kind of historical linking between serpents and forms of divination. Doesn't mean that he's using serpents. Laban's using serpents to divine. There's lots of ways you can look at the stars, just kind of determining the will of God by some means.
I'm more almost associated it with the serpent in the garden being sort of a representation of evil. And like whenever you get into the law, it's like divining is not something you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah,
if I remember right. And so it just seemed interesting that those words sound the same, even if they don't actually relate to one another.
Yeah.
But the other piece of that too is I'm like, if you just look, like, I don't know why you had to define. it's apparent. If you observe and look with your eyes, you should be able to tell I've been blessed. I don't know why the definition was necessary.
Jacob is making that point emphatically. You yourself know, right? And you already know this. And yeah, Laban is sort of like, wow, I'm just sort of able to figure this out, that it has been on account of you. Or Jacob is making this like, he's making your point, I think. It's pretty obvious. The negotiation at the beginning of this is probably worth considering. It's like he doesn't want anything, right? And then Laban, when he says just kind of let me go away, let me go back to my homeland, Laban says, well, what do you name your price? It's just a way of saying, no, you can't leave. So it's not just, oh, I really wish you wouldn't go, but Laban is actually refusing by saying, no, let me pay you something for what, for staying. So it seems to be Laban's doing that kind of sparks this whole ordeal. And along those lines, I mean, the question that comes up is, deceit. Is this, I think I would call this cunning on Jacob's part rather than deceit. There's a fascinating line. Now, this is coming from the mouth of Jacob, but in verse 33, he says, my tzedakah, or it's tzidkati, my righteousness will answer on my behalf. So at the end of all of this, in a future day, you're going to see that I am right. But tzedakah does have righteousness, justice has some, or it's a word that would be associated with godliness in some sense. So it's being his normal cunning self, but it does seem like Laban he's later on in what we'll read next, he's going to interpret this as basically Laban's wrongdoing has kind of forced Jacob into this cunning action. Scott?
Do we know anything about the sticks, the significance of the stripes and the spotted and how they bred? And I guess maybe if we don't, if there's no like agricultural or significant kind of practice in ancient times with sheep breeding, that it almost seems like Jacob is practicing a little of his own divination here, you know, with how other than I don't know, other than practical, you know, breeding practices and sheep herding, I don't know how else you'd explain the reasoning for the sticks and what kinds of sheep breed where and separate the flocks.
Yeah, I just on the surface of the story, which is I mean, he doesn't say that he sort of prayed to the Lord to intervene and do something sort of unusual. I don't know anything about sheep breeding, so I don't know if there's anything to this that somehow when sheep are breeding and the water they're drinking, that it might change the color of their wool. That's but my impression of the story is that Jacob is just a very intelligent shepherd. That he knows something that other people don't. Like he has this sort of shepherding secret about changing, a shepherd extraordinaire about adapting wool color, rather than using some sort of, he's not stirring up a witch's brew or something like along those lines. But maybe there's other insights that need responses to that. And Dusty?
So in teaching this lesson to children a couple of years ago, this really intrigued me, and I was going, what's the deal with the sticks? And so I started researching, and I found some people who'd studied poplar, I think chestnut and almond trees. Chestnut or plain, I don't remember. It's kind of either or. Anyway, they were saying that there are some kind of compounds that whenever you peel back the bark, you expose kind of the sap in the tree. And you put it in water, and it sort of creates almost a tea. And those like compounds that are inside of some of those trees go to actually benefit the whole fertility process. And so with goats and sheep, it's like a 5-month gestation period. Yeah. And so it was interesting to know that it's almost like an herbal, what would you say, almost like an herbal fertility elixir that he's creating with this putting those sticks in the water. Sort of whenever you read the bitter water story in the Exodus, he shows Moses a stick to throw into the water, and it makes the water so that they could drink it, right? It almost is like it does something to the water that makes it drinkable. Same sort of an idea here, that it somehow causes benefit to the whole fertility process. Yeah, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that is definitely the impression the story is giving. That's good. Other insights on sheep breeding or the story otherwise? Any sheep farmers among us? Sometimes, people have some experience.
I have been struck with how much shape and appearance played a role in the ancient religions of all sorts. Things that looked like a certain part of the human body were inferred to have some sort of medical benefit or harm to that part of the human body. And this looked like that to me, that he was saying, I want stripes on these animals, so I'm going to put stripes in the water because they look alike. I was struck with that idea that plays a little bit with the magic theme. But since he is calling himself righteous here, he doesn't think of this as appealing to a God other than Yahweh. He's maybe treating this as a form of prayer to Yahweh, to make him rich through this best he can guess about animal medicine. I'm sure he did not know about the lignans or the other chemicals in the bark, but he's offering this as a request to God to act. And I think that's a lesson for us in our time, that medicine is really a request to God to bless our health. I think there's an important realization there. I speak of this as a statistician, knowing that medical statistics is a vast discipline, and yet at the same time, it always comes down to a certain degree of uncertainty. I treat the things that I do for my health as a request to God to take over and make things real that I can only make educated guesses about.
Yeah, and I think that actually is the theological matrix of these stories is, I mean, Jacob does seem to have like a trade secret here. I think he has some insight, and yet when he interprets, whenever these events are interpreted, and we're going to get more of that, it's the work of the Lord for Jacob, and really for Laban through Jacob. And so everybody's sort of recognizing this is God's work, even though it's a lot of human ingenuity, and that's just part of the fabric of these patriarchal stories. They go together for sure. I want to read through verse 18, because this is really a continuation of the story, and even after 18 the story continues, but Rachel and Leah are brought in. And then one thing to think about, maybe to talk about afterwards, is when you're hearing an interpretation through the voice of a character, like Jacob is going to be interpreting these events for us. And even when he says, like in verse 33, my righteousness will answer for me. I mean, that's Jacob saying this about himself. So you as the reader have to discern whether that's true or not. Whereas if the narrator is telling you something, I mean, generally the narrator has special insight and is trustworthy. That doesn't mean that Jacob's lying here or he's wrong in his interpretation, but it just adds another layer of discernment that we have to give as readers. Okay, so starting in chapter 31, verse 1. Vayishma divrei v'nei Lavan le'mor lakach Yaakov et kol asher la'avinu u me'asher la'avinu asa et kol hakavod hazeh vayar Yaakov et penei Lavan v'hine einenu imo chitmol shilishom. Vayomer, verse 3, Vayomer Adonai el Yaakov shuv el eretz avotecha ulemoladtecha v'eye imach. Okay, translating now, verse 1. And he heard the words of the sons of Laban, saying, Jacob has taken everything that belongs to our father. And from that which belongs to our father, he's made all this wealth for himself. And Jacob saw now this is an idiom, the face of Laban, sort of the disposition perhaps of Laban. And look, it wasn't with him as it was previously in recent. This is an idiom, another idiom for the recent past, Timol Shiloshom. And then verse 3, and Yahweh said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and your kindred, and I will be with you. Verse 4, Vayishlach Yaakov vayikra l'Rachel u'leLeah hasadeh el tzono. Verse 5, Vayomer lahen Roe anochi et pene avichem, ki einenu, elai chitmol shilshom. Velohe avi haya imadi. 6. Ve'etena yadatem, ki b'chol kochi avadti et avichem. 7. Ve'avichem hetel bi. Ve'hechelif et maskuriti eseret monim. Velo nitano Elohim lehara imadi. 8. Im ko yomar nikudim yihye sikarecha v'yaledu kol hatson nikudim v'im ko yomar akudim yihye sikarecha v'yaledu kol hatson akudim. Verse 9. Vayatzel Elohim et mikne avichem vayitin li. Okay, now going back to verse 4 to translate. And Jacob sent, and he called Rachel and Leah to the field of his sheep. And he said to them, I am seeing that the disposition of your father is not as it was to me as it was before. It's not to me as it was before. And the God of my father has been with me. And you all know, or you yourselves know, that with all of my strength I've served your father. But your father has cheated me, and he has changed my wage 10 times. And God has not given him, or maybe permitted him here, to do evil with me. If thus he might say, the speckled ones will be your wage, or and they give birth, all of the sheep give birth to speckled ones, or all the speckled sheep beget. Maybe you want to hear. And if thus he might say, all of the striped ones will be your wage, and then all of the striped ones will give birth. And God has given the livestock of your father, and he's given it to me, or he's taken away the livestock of your father and given it to me. Okay, verse 10. Vayehi be'et yachem hatson, va'esa einai ve'ere b'chalom, v'hine ha'atudim ha'olim al hatson akudim nikudim uverudim. Verse 11. Vayomer Eli Malach ha-Elohim b'chalom Yaakov, va'omar hineni, vayomer sa-na einecha ure'e kol ha-atudim ha'olim al hatson akudim nikudim uverudim ki ra'iti et kol asher lavan oseh lach. 13. Anochi ha'el beit el asher mashachta sham matzeva asher nadarta li sham neder. Ata kum tse min ha'eretz or ha'aretz hazot, v'shuv el eretz moladtecha. Okay, translating verse 10. And in the time of heat, or it came about in the time of when the sheep were in heat, I lifted my eyes and I saw in a dream, and behold, the goats were going up upon the flock, the striped ones and speckled ones and dappled or mottled ones. And he said to me, the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and look at all the goats that are going up upon the flock. Speckled and spotted, or striped and spotted and dappled. For I have seen everything that Laban has done or is doing to you. Verse 13, I am the God of Bethel, in which place you anointed the standing stone, and where you vowed to me a vow. Now get up and go out from this place and return to the land of your kindred. Verse 14. Vata'an Rachel v'Leah v'tomarna lo ha'od lanu chelik v'nachala b'veit avinu halo nochriot nechshavnu lo ki mukaranu vayochal gam achol et kaspenu. Verse 16, ki chol ha'osher asher hitzil Elohim me'avinu lanu hu ulevanenu va'ata kol asher amar Elohim elecha aseh. Okay, just translating those. Verse 14. And Rachel and Leah answered, and they said to him, do we still have a portion and an inheritance in the house of our father? Are we not considered foreigners to him? For he sold us. And he greatly consumed our price, or maybe our money. For all of the wealth which God took from our father belongs to you, or actually, no, sorry, belongs to us and to our sons. And now everything which God has said to you, do. Verse 17. Vayakom Yaakov, vayisa et banav et nashav al hagmelim. Verse 18. Vayin hag et kol miknehu ve'et kol richusho asher rachash. Mikne kinyano asher rachash be'padam or padan aram. Lavo el Yitzchak aviv arza Canaan. Translating verse 17. And Jacob got up and he put his sons and his wife upon camels, and he drove all of his flock, all of his livestock, and all of his possessions which he possessed, the livestock that he had acquired, which he possessed in Padan Aram, to go to Isaac, his father, to the land of Canaan. Okay, that's definitely not the end of the story. But what we're going to do next week is read 19 all the way to the end of chapter 31 or thereabouts, that when Laban and Jacob have another encounter. But that's a good stopping place, I think. So what observations or questions do you have on 31, 1 through 19? Scott?
I think it's in verse 2.
Yeah.
There's the tetragrammaton with the sus at the end. Or
I don't see
Sonnet.
the tetragrammaton. Oh, I see. It's actually, yes, at the end of that line. The somic? The big somic, you mean? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So those, the big letters in the margins mark, there's different reading schedules of the Torah. And they're basically, maybe I should have stopped there. It would be a stopping place between two different stories in the reading schedule of like the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath readings. You can read through the Torah. I think it's in 3 years or 1 year, depending on whether you follow the big pays or the big somics. So that's a marking that the Masoretes used for the reading schedule. Good observation. Other comments or questions?
It's just it's just a a quick thought. I mean, it was striking to me the language of the daughters just describing the treatment that they've received from their father, and I wasn't sure if that was ever tipped off earlier in the story that they felt that way or not, but that it was striking to me as we read it then.
Yeah, it is. Especially, well, I mean, the way they interpret, I mean, they are fully on board with Jacob. And that's probably important for they're considered foreigners in their household. And then also the language of sort of, he sold us, which, the bride price and all of that comes into play as sort of being normal, but the way they're interpreting it as they sold us and then he consumed all of the money. So everything he gained, which Jacob wasn't able to pay him with money, right? He paid him with years, but that made him rich. And he's sort of Laban is unwilling to share that with his own daughters. So you're right, they are fully breaking away. And that sets up the drama of the next story as well.
This, I'd love to know more color about this. Nachi, the foreigners.
Yeah.
Is that similar to Gentile, or what? What is the color behind that?
Yeah, Nochriya is a foreign woman. It can just mean an outsider. Doesn't necessarily. I mean, at this point, you don't really even have Jews. But you do have Abraham's family and Laban's kind of household. I would say he is not treating us like part of our household, and foreigners in that sense, rather than an ethnic division. It's used in, there's another word, zara, for a kind of a stranger or a foreigner. You also have ger, which is specifically like foreign nations and Gentiles. And nochriya is used for, it can be used in an ethnic sense, although I don't think it is here. It's more of just people who do not belong. Like nochrias to Laban's family would be women who are not under his roof, part of his household.
And is this the first time that we have seen Leah and Rachel agree?
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, they've been rivals, but here they are definitely together in this. They speak with one voice. It is interesting that when they're introduced, it's Rachel said and Leah, and then they said, or Rachel answered and Leah, and then they said. So they're speaking with one voice, but Rachel is still seen as the primary character in the way that they're introduced.
I remember doing my first paper at HST on this story,
Oh, all right.
and Don Meredith tore it to shreds. But
That's what he's supposed to do.
But anyway, there was something about it that appealed to me, and I reflected on it through the years. It seems like we've got a couple of businessmen in a wrestling match, and they're sort of semi-ethical, both of them, to be generous. And I would say that Jacob is trying some kind of imitative magic, a pagan practice, when he strips the rods.
Yeah.
And that God works through that, as we see in chapter 31. God is using that pagan practice, and because in his dream, God says, "Look, you're going to get the speckled and spotted that Laban stole from you, because I'm going to allow that to happen." So that's the only way I can make sense of the story is, what's he doing when he strips the bark from those rods? That we know that doesn't work scientifically, but God seems to work through it. And we see examples of that, don't we, throughout. He works through sometimes the unethical or the unspiritual means of his chosen ones to further his plan.
But did you see, did you have the impression that Jacob was doing this as a action in hoping to get God's positive response? That this action of Jacob was focused on God taking the action to complete what he was trying to do?
I'm not sure. It depends on if the story is told in true chronological order. Does chapter 31, the dream, happen before Jacob commits the act or after? If it's before, then he's just sort of following through on God's plan. If it's after, then he was practicing some kind of, he thought, magic trick, which God actually works through. I'm not sure, because sometimes we know that chronologically the stories aren't necessarily in the order they happen. So
it made a lot of sense to me when he described this as my righteousness will speak for this, that he was really thinking that what he was doing was an appeal to God. They didn't have all the instructions about more appropriate liturgy that Moses would later give, because Moses hasn't been born yet. But it just seems like he thinks this is a way of asking God to make things right.
Yeah, I would say Jacob seems very certain of his plan before he enters into that dialogue with Laban, and that he is recalling a dream he didn't tell Laban about it, but he's telling it to Rachel and Leah, and that's to convince them that he's right. This is one of those places, though, because it's interesting that the narrator, it's in the first time through, doesn't tell us that Jacob had a dream. And Jacob has lots of dreams and he gets a lot of revelation, but we only hear this from Jacob himself. Now, I trust Jacob that he had a dream, but if that's where, because we're only hearing this from Jacob's voice, part of me, at least wants to consider, although I don't think I agree with this, but is that Jacob is sort of doing some theological justification for his to Rachel and Leah, and they're convicted by it. But I do think, Jacob is saying, no, he's sort of recalling back, I didn't tell Laban about this, but God gave me a dream, and this sort of led me into wanting to, or this method of changing their colors. But it's true that, it's definitely true that the patriarchs have religious practices that will later be anathema. I mean, even in this later on, we have the God of Bethel and anointing the stone, and all that story comes back again. Of course, Deuteronomy would be opposed to anointing standing stones. Marisa, you had your hand up before. Yeah.
I think you have a family here that has some very interesting dynamics.
Yeah.
Because when you look at everything that happens over here with Laban, I mean, first you have the servant of Abraham who comes, and he's bringing all sorts of presents. And Laban, along with his father, it's like, okay, here, take her, take my sister, go.
Oh, yeah.
And, so they've gotten some reward in getting rid of his sister at that point. Now they're back in the same area.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that I wouldn't have called Joseph and Laban businessmen here. This is more like the battle of the two con men, it seems to me. Because each one has their time that they're trying to get the best. And it seems sort of like when Jacob is talking about his righteousness, it's sort of God is my witness in this.
Yeah.
Because Laban automatically removes all the sheep that are supposed to be the ones that would be Jacob's, sends them off with his son someplace.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they have some idea of genetics at this time, knowing the tendency of certain colors to have certain colors then when they are born. And, the sticks, I don't know, but maybe that's just part of, this idea, God is my witness. You've taken them all away. Well, see, I'm just going to put a piece of wood here and God's going to make it be true.
Yeah.
But then you get the daughters now and they're into this thing too.
Mm-hmm.
And I know at some point it became that the dowry of the bride price was supposed to be held for the daughter in case the husband decided he didn't want her anymore. At what point did that come about?
I don't know. Right. I mean, he serves his time, which gives the wealth. So that's the price. And then now he wants him to serve more, and he's saying, name your price. I'm not sure, obviously from Jacob's perspective, Laban has cheated him 10 times and he's changed the wage multiple times. So Laban started it, and God is still, in spite of that, God is making me wealthy. This is actually parallel. Marisa, I know I'm not answering your very good question here because I don't think I have a good answer, but it is parallel to like the Abraham, Sarah, Abimelech story, when Abraham uses some deceit, right, and gets caught in it. But when he leaves town, he's like richer for it. And I think Jacob is sort of in the line of Abraham in that sense. I would call this cunning. And Jacob is using his cunning ability to be cunning in order for God to profit him in spite of Laban's deceit. At least that's Jacob's perspective. And it seems to be the narrator's perspective, although we just don't have great insight to that. But obviously also the daughters agree, Rachel and Leah agree with Jacob. They also feel cheated and robbed by Laban. So they're responding. Well, our time is up. I'm fine with sticking around, but I think I'll go ahead and conclude officially. But if you want to hang out and talk a little bit more, we can do that. But if you need to go, I'm going to pause it here. And anyway, thank you all for your good conversation. I always really benefit from this myself. Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank